Alright, so Blender has been sucking the soul out of your computer every time you open it to try and make something cool. Your renders take ages, your viewport is choppy as hell, you constantly keep running out of GPU memory, and the worst of it all, you are afraid of unintentionally turning into an IED when your computer finally decides to give in and just blow up on you. So I am here to try and prevent that from happening to the best of my ability. I've been using Blender for over 8 years now. 90% of what was spent on really below average laptops that struggle to render even a single frame, but I still somehow managed to make, at least in my opinion, more than good enough, ambitious, even in some cases, renders with them. So I'll let you know everything I know about optimization in Blender. I'll take you through all the settings and preferences you should change in Blender in order to get the best performance out of it. Not just check boxes, by the way, blindly without understanding what they actually do, so you can actually learn something. We'll also check out some useful add-ons and extensions that might help you with this whole optimization thing. And at the end, I will even sprinkle in some laptop and computer recommendations. If you're about to buy a new computer anytime soon or looking for an upgrade to your current workstation, make you understand what you should be looking for when buying a computer if you're looking to get into this Blender 3D CGI hobby seriously. Alright, there's a lot of ground to cover, so let's not waste any more time and just get into it. Make use of the chapter marks if you think you know a certain tip and trick while I'm covering it, so you can save even more time. And yeah, talking of saving time, let's not waste any time on obvious things. Like obviously you have to change to CUDA mode if you have a non-RTX NVIDIA GPU, and optics mode if you have an RTX NVIDIA GPU. And of course you should switch to GPU compute from CPU here in the render properties if your device has a GPU. Because GPUs are just faster than CPUs. They are the rabbits in the turtle and rabbit race. Only they're not stupid and cocky like the rabbit from that story. Watch this video by Adam Savage if you still need some convincing. And also obviously you should always use the latest version of Blender too, because the development team is always improving things in it. Just recently they introduced GPU based denoising for the open image denoiser and GPU based compositing in Blender 4.2. That has been revolutionary to overall rendering performance, at least in my case. So why wouldn't you keep Blender updated? And why wouldn't you use a denoiser either? And yeah, while we are talking about denoisers, what I've also noticed is if you don't have a good fast new GPU, it is always better to change this start sample here in the viewport section to something higher, like 35 or so. So weaker GPUs rendering the scene and denoising it at the same time right from the first sample can be a little taxing. So keeping it at a higher number can take some load off of the computer and thus improve your overall viewport performance. But yeah, that's it. Let's now move on to more important things. These were just general things that anyone and everyone using Blender should be aware of before they even touch a key and start making anything within the software. So yeah, I thought I would get it out of the way right at the beginning. Alright, let's now get to the crux of the most foundational problems your 3D scene might have that might be causing a performance hit. And probably to no one's surprise, it's either the poly count or the texture resolutions you're using in your scene. You can't just download a bunch of models from Sketchfab, apply 4K materials on them and use 4K HDRIs in the scene and use a bunch of procedural materials and geometry nodes generators in them with millions of vegetation assets spread around and expect nothing problematic to happen. That's stupid. You gotta do some housekeeping at the least. Like for example, a ground photo scan like this with around 60,000 faces, which in my opinion is fine. Most modern computers should be able to handle that kind of geometry. But look what happens when I use a decimate modifier on it. A ratio of 0.5 slashes the poly count by exactly half, and you barely lose any visual fidelity in the model. Even the ratio of 0.1 looks fine to me from a distance. So it would be really stupid to not use the decimate modifier, even when your computer can handle it. Same goes for the merge by distance shortcut. If you are downloading a third-party model from the internet, chances are it was not modeled in Blender and has a ton of overlapping geometry that you can't actually see with your naked eye. But try the shortcut M in the edit mode of the model and select the merge by distance option from the drop-down that pops up and watch how many vertices get removed with this method. The weld modifier also works in a similar way, so you can use that too if you want a non-destructive workflow. There's also the unsubdivide function that you can use by right-clicking the mesh when in edit mode, which does exactly what it says. It just unsubdivides a mesh. And all three of these methods are great automated ways to slash down your poly count. So yeah, you have no more excuses. Get your poly count under control and chances are most of your problems might be fixed then and there. Also, while we are talking about poly count based optimization, I hope you're already using the Alt D shortcut to duplicate everything and not the Shift D shortcut. Like Alt D creates an exact clone. It's not causing any performance hit, while Shift D creates a twin. They might look the same, but they are two different individuals sucking their own GPU and CPU resources textures respectively. So yeah, use Alt D for copy. Same goes for collection instances too. If you need to copy a whole collection, just right click on it and go to instance to see, and then use that instead of actual whole ass collections. Alright, moving on. If you have worked out your poly count and you've still got some issues, maybe it's time to now check out the textures you've used in your scene. I've seen a lot of beginners just download 4K textures and 4K HDRIs just because they think higher the resolution means better the quality in the final render. But it's not a video quality drop-down menu like on YouTube that will magically make your renders just look good because you used high resolution assets. Your render looks like shit because it looks like shit, not because you use low quality resolution textures. For example, look at this render. I rendered it with different texture resolutions by using the Simplify panel in Blender. And from a distance, I bet you can barely tell any difference between the renders. Yes, the 128-bit and the 256-bit resolutions look a bit more floofy, for lack of a better word, but the difference between the 4K texture one and the 2K texture one, and even the 1K texture one, is negligible to my eye, if I'm being honest with you. So why would you want to bog down your computer with these super heavy texture files when you can get away with such low resolution texture files without any significant quality hit in your final render? So yeah, use the Simplify panel and clamp your textures and render out a few test results yourself if you don't trust me. But stop using 4K textures just blindly, please. Same goes for procedural materials too. I know they're fun to play around with and they're versatile as hell, but all that math and all that processing will add up and you'll definitely feel it in the viewport from time to time. So I'm not saying don't use them, but just know they are coming at a performance cost. A better alternative would be to get a result you're happy with them and then just bake those textures. That's a much better way to make use of procedural textures on a weak computer, if you ask me. By the way, while we are talking about texture optimization, do purge your blend files from time to time too to get rid of any unused, unnecessary texture files or object data that might be floating around in the background from some weird object that you imported long time ago but aren't using anymore in the blend file. Purging them from this menu here in Blender will ensure they don't bog down your system in any possible way in the background. But yeah, all these tips that I mentioned in this chapter were applicable more for people who use a ton of third-party assets from websites like Sketchfab or Quixel or CG Trader or Fab.com that is releasing very soon. But if you do everything by yourself within Blender, like model and texture everything yourself, as tedious as it sounds, it will always perform better than most of your other scenes that you made using only third-party assets. Because Blender knows exactly what's going on there, because everything was made in-house. As stupid as this tip sounds, doing everything yourself within Blender might be the best optimization tip I can give you, if I'm being honest. Just go easy on the subdiv modifier and don't bevel your model to oblivion and you should be fine. By the way, in the preferences, you can turn on this GPU subdivision option as well, if it's not already turned on by default. This again just allows your GPU to handle the subdivision in your scene. That's it. But yeah, these were some foundational tips. Let's now talk about some specific render settings you should be wary of. Starting off with this noise threshold checkbox here in the render properties tab, because I've heard some absurd tips around this field. It's so stupid. Because if I understand the explanation mentioned in the Blender manual for this field, it's literally just a A and B option. Should the render hit the sample count first or the noise threshold first? Which is just a way to measure the noise in a render. That's it. And I hate using the noise threshold field because I find it's always better to just mention the sample count. This is what I do. I put a big sample count in, something like 1024 in this field, and watch my scene get rendered and just make note of when my render starts looking cleaner to me. Like for this render here, I can see after the 80th sample, there's negligible difference in the noise that's getting resolved. So I set the sample count to somewhere close to 80 and that's it. The rest of the noise, I just leave it to the denoiser. I rarely ever go above 200 samples with my renders because the denoisers are so good these days. They do all the work for you, so why would you not make use of them? So yeah, that's what I do. If I have misunderstood the noise threshold field, please do enlighten me in the comment section below. I would love to learn more about how it works. I don't want to be the source of misinformation here, so please let me know. And yeah, by the way, you're right. If you're thinking, won't the low sample count sometimes cause temporal noise in moving animations? You're right. I've seen it too. It happens a lot with my renders too, especially the ones with a lot of glossy reflections. But more often than not, in my observation, higher sample counts also don't fix those temporal artifacts. You'd have to go really high in the sample count to resolve them, I think. So a better way to get around that would be to just set the sample count to something low, like 50 or 100, and then just use the denoiser and resolve. Resolve is a great temporal denoiser that you can use for free, by the way. It's more approachable in the paid version because you can do everything in the color tab itself, but the feature's there in the free version too. You just gotta put a little extra effort into it and do the noise reduction in the fusion tab rather than the color tab. But it's not too bad, trust me. It's super easy. I'll link a super easy and super fast tutorial in the description below. So do check it out. But yeah, in short, sample count should be below 200 or even 100 in most cases. I barely ever go above 35, to be honest. So yeah, dial down your sample count and let these modern denoisers do all the work for you. Moving on, another panel to pay attention to here is the light paths panel. To explain it in short, it just measures how many times the light will get bounced around in your scene. The more bounces you have, obviously, the more time the computer will take to calculate those bounces. Easy. And again, just look at your viewport and observe if you see any difference in the render when you lower these numbers. I, in most cases, rarely ever go above 4 light bounces. And if you don't want to experiment with it all and put all this effort into it, just go and select the fast or limited global illumination preset here from the preset panel. That's it. Also, the type of lighting you use in your scene can also affect render times, by the way. Based on my research, the sun lamp is known to be the most performant, and then the rest of them, point lights, area lights, and spotlights, are pretty close to each other. Even HDRIs aren't that bad. But what's worse is mesh lighting as far as performance goes. This doesn't mean you shouldn't use mesh lights at all and only use sun lights all the time. These are just tips you should know just in case. That's it. Alright, let's move on. Move on to one of my favorite optimization tips, which is changing the tile size field here in the lower end of the render properties panel. It just decides how big the size of the tile will be when you render something, the size of this box right here. And if not anything else in this video, at the least, please experiment with this field and see what yields you the best performance. For my GPU, I have found a value around 2048 or 4096 yields me the best results. You can start from 64 and go up slowly bit by bit to see what is the best number for your GPU. You might just save a few seconds here and there, but they will add up in the long run, especially when making animations. Alright, then comes the persistent data checkbox, another important field that you should just turn on. If you hover over it, you will know it helps in faster re-renders because it saves a bunch of information as cache right when you render for the first time, and thus it doesn't have to calculate all of those things again and again for subsequent frames or subsequent renders. But yeah, that's all the render settings I mess with usually when looking to optimize. There are other things you could experiment with too here, like using camera culling that processes only the data that's visible to the camera. This feature can help out a lot when rendering, say, a lot of vegetation in your scene. So maybe some of it maybe goes off camera or is too far away from the camera. You don't need them processed for your scene because they're not in the camera basically. So it's definitely worth turning on. Actually, this vegetation thing just reminded me, if you have really heavy objects in your scene, like a really dense tree or a photo scan somewhere, and you can clearly see that the sole reason why your viewport is lagging, the best way to handle that is to just go to their object properties and set their viewport display as bounds. Do that and that will definitely help in overall viewport performance. But yeah, back to the point, there are other settings here too that are worth exploring, like the fast GI approximation panel, which stands for fast global illumination approximation panel. If you hover over that checkbox, the bubble clearly says it's for a faster viewport experience and reduced final render quality if you're okay with that. So turn it on and you will clearly see it makes everything a little flatter and a little dull. But hey, the bubble clearly said it's meant for faster viewport experiences. So try it out for the viewport if your viewport is being really laggy in the rendered mode, and when you're ready to finally render, maybe turn it off. And you can learn what these individual sliders do, by the way, by either just playing around with them or just hovering over them and reading the information bubble. Actually, I would recommend you hover over every field you see here in the Render Properties tab and read the bubble and decide if it sounds interesting or not for your use case. If it does, right-click on it and read the online Blender manual about it too and learn about it even more, because that's how I learned all my optimization tips. Like say for example, this light tree checkbox, it clearly states in the bubble it's for instances when you have a lot of light sources in your scene. All you had to do was read that to know that if you're making a scene with a lot of light sources, it might be a good idea to turn this feature on. That's how you learn new things. You can't expect to learn and grow all the time through just YouTube videos or some post somewhere you saw on social media. That's all I'm trying to say. And now, I think would be the perfect moment to talk about the best optimization tip in Blender, in my opinion. And funnily enough, you can never find a good tutorial on it on YouTube. So let me try and give it a shot. I'm obviously talking about render layers. And I know it confuses you, it confused me too when I was a beginner, but it is very simple once you get the hang of it. So let me try and take you through it. Step 1, neatly organize everything that's there in your scene into collections. You could do midground, foreground, background, you could do top, center, bottom, or you could do head, dick, and feet, it doesn't matter. Just put the objects in meaningful collections. That's it. Do what I do. I just put everything that's relevant to each other into separate collections. The more the better, actually. The point is to separate the most demanding objects in your scene. Like in this scene, the rickshaw, the sidewalk, the people on the sidewalk, the buildings on the side, the volumetrics are all in separate collections. And now step 2 is to make the render layers. You do that by coming here in the top right, press this little thing and selecting copy settings. And that's it. You've made a new render layer. Do that at least 3-4 times. The weaker your computer, the more layers you should have, ideally. Because the point is to render every part of the scene separately so your computer doesn't choke because it's trying to do too many things at once. You separate them into different layers and now your computer has to use lesser resources to render these separate individual layers. You know that GPU has run out of memory error that keeps popping up when you try to render something, which by the way you can keep track of by going to the bottom right part of Blender and right clicking and checking this video memory and system memory checkbox, which is for GPU and RAM respectively. You can expect that error when you see your VRAM closing into its full capacity. And render layers, in my opinion, are the best way to get rid of that out of memory issue. So yeah, you make multiple layers and name them too if you want. But now comes the important part. In step 3, you have to go to the first layer, click on this little filter icon here and enable this holdout icon thing you see here. Once you do that, you should now see that same icon here on the right in the outliner beside every collection. Now, all you gotta do is keep that first collection as is, don't touch that at all. But for the rest of them, just enable this holdout icon. When you do that, you will see only the contents of the first collection are now visible in the viewport, while the rest of them have this checkered alpha mask thing on them. If you don't see the alpha mask and just see like a gray color, come into the render properties tab and enable transparent under the film panel here, and then you should be able to see it. And now, all you have to do is go to the next layer. Once there, all you have to do is not touch the second collection this time, and do that holdout thing all over again for all the rest of the collections, including the first one. So now you got the second collection visible in the viewport, but all the rest of them are transparent. And that is it. Now you just gotta repeat that process for the rest of the layers. For the third layer, do it for the third collection. For the fourth layer, do it for the fourth collection, and so on and so forth. Don't go crazy and make like 100 collections and 100 layers. That would be counterproductive. What I would suggest is to stay under 10, and that should be good enough for most use cases. Now the elements of your scene are nicely separated in all these layers. Your computer isn't choking anymore because it has to render fewer elements at a single moment in time rather than doing all of it all together. But we still gotta put all of them together at the end when the final image file is generated. And we do that in the Compositor tab. All you have to do here is bring up the render layer node, select your first layer, bring up another render layer node and select your second layer, another one for third, another one for fourth, and so on and so forth. Then we need the alpha over node. We bring it in close to the first two render layer nodes and we join the first two render layer nodes like this. Then we join the third render layer node to another alpha over node like this. And then we join the fourth layer, and then we join the fifth layer, and so on and so forth, until we have the last alpha over node which we connect to the composite node here, like this. And then we are done. You press render, you will see all your different layers getting rendered one by one, and then getting mixed all together right at the end. Mission successful. At least for my end. I'm sure 90% of you are still confused as hell. If you are, just ping me on Instagram or something, and I'll help you out there. I know this is complicated if you've never done this before, but again, trust me, you want to learn optimization, this is the most fundamental thing you need to get good at. So take your time, but learn it. It's gonna save you a lot of hair pulling in the future. Trust me. Oof, that was a lot, right? So let's just step back a little bit and finish this video off with some general optimization tips. Like render resolution. There is no shame in rendering a shot in 720p or even lower than that if your computer is taking too long to render 1080p or 4K resolutions. The point is to finish a project and not let these tiny performance hindrances get in the way of you finishing your projects. Nowadays, I just see people rendering in 720p or 480p and just using AI upscalers in post to bring them to traditional high quality resolutions. That to me sounds smart as hell because resolution at the end of it all is what finally decides how long a render is gonna take. So if you can get away with a 720p render and some AI upscaling at the end of it all, you have just saved a shit ton of time, my friend. Believe me. Actually, you know what? Skipping cycles as a render engine altogether is not a bad idea either. The Eevee render engine, or the Eevee Next render engine now, is shockingly close to cycles sometimes, and much faster in almost all cases. So it would be stupid not to delve into this venture sometime for a project or two, and see if that is easier for your computer. The resolution of the render, the sample count, and all of that crap will just go for a toss if you opt for the Eevee render engine. And on similar lines, sometimes when I just have to check the animation or the flow of the overall scene, I render the animation in the viewport mode directly, because that's all you need sometimes. You don't need to render a full scene from scratch to just check if the fan is swinging at the right speed or not, or if the legs of a character are moving at a realistic pace or not. You can make all those deductions with just a viewport render. Same goes for step rendering as well. You don't always have to render each and every frame for every scene. You can enter 2 or 3 here in the step frames field and skip every second or third frame just to see how the overall scene is looking before you go full-blown 100% render mode on a scene. Some people just render half the frames and then use AI tools like flow frames or optical flow frame interpolation tools to generate the in-between frames later on in post. This works great for animations that don't have any crazy motion or animation going on in them. So you can save 50% of your rendering time right there, which is absurd. It's beyond optimization at this point. It's just a smart thing to do, I think. Actually, another smart thing that pops up in my head is to use the Ctrl-B shortcut to box select the region you want to see rendered, because that's all you want to look at in that moment. Like maybe I just want to see how the hair on the cat is looking in this shot, so I'll just restrict the render region to be around that cat, and that's it. I didn't have to render the whole thing just so I could look at the cat, thus saving a bunch of time. Simple things like these will save you a shit ton of time. I can't tell you how many times I've just put a whole scene to render overnight for 12 hours or so, thinking everything will be just fine when I wake up, and then I wake up in the morning and I look at the render and see these teeny tiny mistakes here and there, which were completely avoidable if I had just followed the last 3 tips that I just mentioned. But I didn't because I'm lazy and negligent. So don't be like me, be smart and remember these tips. Another thing to remember would be to always render in EXR, because it's easier for your computer to save EXR files than say compared to a PNG file. So yeah, keep that in mind too. And now on a slightly disappointing note, you should maybe sometimes disable super demanding effects like motion blur, which I know sucks because you really want that motion blur sometimes, but that's a really heavy effect and it definitely adds up to your overall render time. But disable it in Blender and add the motion blur in post if you want. It won't look perfect, but you will save a ton of rendering and processing time that could be used otherwise actually, and it doesn't even look that bad if you ask me. The same thing goes for volumetrics as well. I know they make your ugly scene look 10 times better instantly without any effort, but sometimes it's just not worth it time-wise. So if you can let these extra effects go, please do. Similar things like super demanding particle systems in your scene, or crazy simulations in your scene, or crazy displacements, or any other heavy stuff in your scene is gonna clog your computer's resources. And you know that, so you gotta pull back sometimes. In fact, this next advice will sting a little bit, but you have to know this, that there's no shame in making something smaller, something simpler, or even stylistic for that matter, that is less demanding on your computer. Like I only made isometric rooms for the longest time because that's all my computer could handle. I wanted to make super high detailed photorealistic scenes, but I just couldn't because my laptop just couldn't handle it. So I made what I could and got better at Blender that way. And eventually my skills grew and I made some money and upgraded my laptop. And then I made these short films with simple scenes and close-up shots because that's all my new computer could handle. I still wanted to make super high quality Hollywood level VFX, but even if I wanted to or had the skill for it, I couldn't because my computer just didn't have that kind of performance bandwidth. So in short, all I'm trying to say is pull back your vision a little bit sometimes. Make simpler things if you can at first. Get good at that and level up gradually. Simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication. I bet you've heard that before. So dial it back, don't be a dummy, don't let your potato laptop tell you what to do. Instead, you adapt and tell it what to do. You be the alpha in this relationship. Yeah, but anyway, if these tips mean nothing to you, you don't want to pull back and just want to render this awesome thing you made with no cutbacks whatsoever, but you just can't render it because Blender keeps showing this GPU out of memory error again and again, all you can do now is switch to the CPU mode from the GPU compute mode. This will most probably get rid of that GPU out of memory error, but the render times will just increase like crazy because as mentioned before, you have now switched to the turtle from the rabbit. So get ready for that slow and steady pace. So while that render is running in the background for an eternity, I will move on and state some more obvious facts. Facts like, of course you can't have thousands of tabs open in Chrome when you're about to render a heavy scene. And of course you should never be in the rendered view mode or the material view node in the viewport while you're starting a render in the foreground. That too can clog up important GPU and CPU resources that make or break a rendering situation sometimes. So be in the solid view mode, or even better in the wireframe view mode whenever you're rendering something. Actually, there are methods where you can render a scene by using command line prompts, so Blender doesn't even have to be open while rendering. It might sound absurd, but again, when it's a heavy scene and all you have to work with is 4 GB of VRAM, these little things can add up and help out a lot sometimes. So I'll link how to do this command line thing in the description below, so you can check that out. Actually, you can directly use the Flamenco tool that is made by the official Blender Studio team. It's a render manager tool basically that's completely free by the way, but that same tool allows you to do this command line thing intrinsically, where you can queue up renders and they will render without ever you having to even open Blender up. I'll link a guide to that in the description too, so you can check that out as well, and even the command line thing out, whatever floats your boat. But yeah, getting back to the obvious points, you of course have to do the basic housekeeping stuff that keeps a computer generally healthy, like cleaning your cache and uninstalling unnecessary heavy apps, or disabling startup apps that you never use, and staying away from fishy malware infected sites, stuff like that will hinder the performance of anything you do on the computer. Also, other basic things like you should always be in the performance mode of your computer when rendering things. Same with your GPU, you gotta be in the performance mode and not in the quality mode or somewhere in between if you want quicker results. And yeah, it's not just about software level optimizations all the time. If you want effective performance from your computer month after month and year after year, you gotta take care of it from the outside as well. You have no idea how much cleaning the fans of your GPU and CPU can enhance the performance of your computer. Actually, I always have a temperature widget switched on my computer taskbar that measures the GPU and CPU temperature all the time. Because every few months, I see it rising little by little, and that's when I open up my CPU case or the backside of my laptop and just get rid of all the dust and filth there. And that alone sometimes improves the performance by 30 or 40%, no kidding. So keep everything clean, inside and outside. And yeah, also be prepared to keep your computer on for long hours if you want to do this CGI, VFX, 3D thing. You're gonna have to torture your device a little bit. 3D renders take a lot of time, usually more than 12 hours at a stretch. So if you are too sensitive about your little computer being overworked, maybe you should find another hobby, because this is hardcore stuff. You gotta keep that thing on forever and ever if you want to get anything done. So be ready to have a barbecue every time you start to render a project, basically. And you know what? Break your renders into pieces if you think they're taking way too long. That's what I do. I render the first 50 frames the first night, then the next 50 frames the other, and then the next 50 the other, until I am done. This little deer render that you see here took 7 minutes per frame to render on my older laptop. I had it running for 2 days straight until it was finished rendering. So yeah, you might burn your laptop along the way, but hey, you got the render done, finally. Cheers! And I think now would be the perfect time to move on to the next section, which is laptop and computer recommendations. And no, I'm not gonna give you exact recommendations. I'm not gonna tell you buy this laptop or this GPU specifically. I'll instead tell you what you should be looking for when buying a computer from a 3D artist perspective. So you should first of all try and get an NVIDIA RTX GPU if you can. I know AMD GPUs are great, and I know Apple and MacBooks are great. But the truth of the matter is, NVIDIA and Windows and Blender just go well together. And NVIDIA is at the forefront of all these new AI and denoising technologies that it would be kinda stupid to ignore them. Now this might change in the future, but for now, if you want the least friction in your workstation, you gotta go with NVIDIA. And if you can't afford it, go for an RTX card. Doesn't matter which one. Get the cheapest, most affordable RTX card, but go for an RTX card. Otherwise, all these advancements I'm talking about will never come to your graphic card if you choose an old GTX based NVIDIA graphic card. The GTX cards are not bad, especially for beginners, I think. You can actually look at my channel and you'll see what kind of things you can make with them. But what I would suggest is spend a little extra if you can and get an RTX card at the least. The second thing to focus on from there on would be the VRAM. RAM really doesn't matter here in the 3D world. It matters, but not as much as VRAM does. So get as much VRAM as you can afford in your GPU. 4GB is fine for beginners and early intermediate users. 6GB is great. 8GB is phenomenal. And anything above that is just a blessing. So yeah, focus on VRAM because RAM is first of all cheap and also upgradable. Get 8GB RAM if you want, and you should be fine. If it gets laggy in a year or two, upgrade it to 60 and you'll be fine again. It is not as important as VRAM, just remember that. And for processors, get Intel, get AMD, it doesn't matter. Just decide which GPU you want and then Google which processor goes well with that GPU and you'll get your answers right away. And finally, don't get an HDD, not in 2024, just don't. Get an SSD for the love of God. You have no idea how much faster an SSD is. I don't care, get an SSD. It's a huge upgrade for a fraction of the price, so just get an SSD. No excuses. And yeah, if you want more insights into which GPU and which CPU performs the best with Blender, check out the Blender Benchmarks website directly. That will answer all of your questions in just a minute or two. So do all your research and check the Blender Benchmark website at the end, and that decision making should become much easier. And let's now finally talk a little bit about optimization add-ons. And I only got 3 suggestions for you. I've got Simplify Plus, I've got Memsaver, and I've got the ToOptimize add-on. All 3 tools are great. All 3 do similar things. Like basically they help you identify which object or which texture or which modifier is causing a performance hit in your scene. They're really helpful, but all 3 of them are paid add-ons. And I know you hate paid add-ons because you are a cheapskate just like me. But good things come at a cost. So you choose. You want a $30 add-on right now, or you want to wait for like 5 or 6 years and save up $1,000 and buy a laptop or a computer then. It's all up to you. Same goes with render farms. It will cost you, again, probably upwards of $25 for every scene. But again, do you want to spend this $25 now or just wait for a few years before you can save up enough money to buy your new laptop or computer later on in future? It's all up to you and your circumstances. I'm not telling you what to do. Actually, there are other free render farm alternatives out there too, like Google Colab and Sheepit Render Farm. But in my observation, they're never as reliable as the paid options, but are definitely worth checking out if you're not stuck in a client project and only need help with some personal projects. And I know it sucks to have to spend money to get such facilities, but hey, again, good things come at a price. Not everything awesome can be free, like Blender. So I'll link all of these add-ons in the description below. You can check them out there. And while we are on the topic of add-ons, you should disable the add-ons you don't use. They won't really affect rendering speeds per se. At best, they might just improve startup speeds when you first open up Blender. But honestly, you never know when an add-on receives a weird little update and it screws up everything in the background and you won't even know what's going on and causing the chaos because it's all happening in the background. It has happened to me in the past. Either the add-on gets updated or Blender gets updated, thus making the add-on incompatible for that version, and that can cause a host of performance issues if the add-on isn't well developed. So the general advice I would give is only enable the add-ons you use most often. The other ones, you use them where you need them and then just disable them. That's it. And yeah, I think that's it. That's all the tips and tricks I had for you in this video. But now finally, in conclusion, I am telling you, if I see a single comment in the comment section where you're crying about your shitty computer, I am going to flip out.
Oh, everybody has such great computers. I have such a shitty computer. Oh, even the Flintstones had a better computer than me. Oh, my life sucks. I'm so unlucky and so poor and all these other...
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Yes, I know you have a shitty computer. I know it sucks. But what are you gonna do? You're not gonna win a lottery tomorrow and get a new computer right away. If you care about this little passion you're exploring right now, you gotta do what you can with the things that you got.
But no, you don't get it. You say that because you have always had a great computer. I have the worst computer ever in the history of mankind. My computer doesn't even have a GPU.
So why did you get into this hobby if you didn't have a GPU? Go find a new hobby and get back to it when you can afford a GPU. What is all this crying going to achieve anyway? Nothing. It sucks, I know, but again, all you can do is the best with what you have. There are so many people with so much worse computers who are so much better than you. So the chances are it was never your computer or your GPU or your circumstances. It was just you. You were the problem. Not your computer, not your skill set. You. Look at this black screen. Look at your reflection in it. You see yourself? You were the problem. Always. So buck up, shut up, and get to work. Don't compare yourself and your circumstance to others, because comparison kills creativity. So just shut up and get to work.
But you
Shut the f up.